This is the AMP Business Podcast, a weekly show featuring the top leaders, innovators, and hustlers that are making it happen in Northern California. Here's your host, Chad Alderson.
Hey, welcome to another episode of the AMP Business Podcast. We're talking about homelessness in Chico, California. With me today is Angela McLaughlin. She's the board president for Safe Space in Chico. Angela, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
Thank you for coming. It's been a very educational series of interviews for me. I'm still wrapping my head around it. I feel like I know like maybe 5% of what's going on now. First of all, before we get into what your organization does, let's talk about you.
Okay.
Where are you from?
Well, originally from Los Angeles, but we moved up here when I was a kid, so I've been here most of my life.
And since you were in high school?
Oh, elementary school.
Oh, okay. So you're basically born in LA and then transplanted.
Yep.
Why'd they come up?
Kind of hilariously, it was that time. It was the 70s. My parents thought that they would get back to the earth, and we moved up to Butte Creek Canyon. And
hippies were they?
They were. Yeah, we thought that we'd grow all of our own vegetables and raise our own animals, and but two kids from LA really couldn't pull that off. But we stayed anyway.
Yeah, they didn't have YouTube back then.
No,
you
they
can do
didn't.
it now. You can figure out how to raise chickens and all that stuff. What's your educational background?
I'm actually business and information systems, so
We
IT.
did the same.
Yeah.
Did you go through computer information systems, or did you go management information systems, like business track?
Management
Business.
information
Yeah, we did
systems.
the same. We're exactly the same.
Yeah.
Huh.
Although I really diverted in a different direction after graduating. So
Don't we all? What did you get your emphasis in when you were there? You went to Chico State, I assume.
no, I didn't go to Chico State, University of Maryland, and I don't even remember what my emphasis was. I was thinking at the time, I went back to school late. I worked at, I did wedding cakes and bakery management at the upper crust for many years, and went back to school at 28. And a lot of my friends had graduated with, a degree in liberal arts and were also working in restaurants with me. So when I went back, my big goal was just to be employable.
yeah, that's a good goal. How long? So you've been in Chico basically since you've been a kid, but you went to Maryland and you were gone for a bit then?
No, they had the first. So I did all my undergrad stuff, and then once I shifted into the graduate stuff, or the meat of the degree, Chico State, all of their classes interfered with my job, and I was making fair money for Chico.
Yeah.
And so it ended up being less expensive to do remote classes with the University of Maryland versus quitting my job or giving up a good portion of my job and going to Chico State.
So it worked out. And fortunately, we have distributed education options now, which is nice.
The killer of it was that I signed up for University of Maryland and had done a year, and then Chico State introduced their own program. So if I'd have been a year later, I wouldn't have had to pay out-of-state tuition. So dang it.
Yeah, that's a good reason for me. It took me I think I went back to college. I went to college for the first time, really got serious about it when I was like 27 or something.
Yeah. We really were similar tracks.
Yeah. You're in IT right now? Mm-hmm. Okay. What do you do specifically?
Independent consulting. I'm self-employed and I work primarily with small businesses, a lot of doctors' offices. But just a focus on small business, and that kind of, for somebody that's local IT, that's a little bit of everything. I mean, small businesses don't have an IT department, and so it's everything from troubleshooting a hardware problem to, working on the databases and migrating and servers and
which I could talk to you about for 2 hours, but we're here to talk about homelessness. But so. How did you get involved with Safe Space? Like, what got you into the public services sector originally? Like, what was your... So,
it's been, I guess, about 3 winters ago. My husband works for Kaiser Permanente, and he telecommutes. But Kaiser requires a certain number of hours of community service every year, and we were getting into December, and he hadn't done his service, and he had been complaining some about the homelessness in Chico. And so I was looking for something that we could do together and came across Safe Space. And so it was partly like, hey, this is, fulfill your requirement, and it'll be fun. We'll go volunteer together, and also a little bit perhaps of a dig of like, well, you want to complain about the homeless, you get to see them.
Yeah.
And so once we started, we fulfilled, the number of hours that were required for him, but it was like I just kind of fell in love with the group. And I think, in the first place, perhaps even less the homeless themselves and more the people that were serving them. Like really, it's been, kind of a handful of people earlier on that were showing up for shift after shift after shift. And it felt too bad to leave them once I saw that, they had jobs and lives and And so that initially kept me going, but then, as the winter went on, I got to know a lot of the people that were on the streets, and that wasn't something that I hadn't really known folks personally before, and the whole thing just shifted my perspective just hugely.
Yeah, one of my personal biases before it kind of hit me in a very familiar and personal way was that all homeless, they're not professionals. Their backgrounds are all similar, but I think I was talking to Rob about it, but I had a friend that went up in the upper echelons of tech and came crashing down and ended up on the street in Venice, and it affects everybody, and families have it, a lot of families have one kid that goes off the rails and it can end up on the streets if the family leaves, pulls a rug out from under them, or they can be in their bedroom,
or you just can't help them. I mean, I have some experience with that in my family too.
Yeah.
And there is some point where it's impossible for the families to keep on assisting folks. And I have real empathy for that.
Yeah, it's a tough subject to parse. It really is, and there's one thing I've also learned in the course of these interviews is that there's a different strata of homeless person as well. And the ones that I think that cause a lot of community angst are, I would say, atypical of the population as a whole, and I want to get into, how to deal specifically with that segment of the population that's kind of like putting a lot of pressure on, the community, and also, the general community. And then I was talking to, I think, Joy about the 99% versus the 1% in terms of Chico's, homeless population's like roughly 1% of the overall population.
Right.
So it's the 20% of the 1%, and how to deal with that situation, because there's even low barrier shelters are still not really set up for that. It doesn't seem like, but we'll get into it in a second.
All right.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk Safe Space. When was it founded, the organization?
So Safe Space was founded 5 years ago, and it was a sub-organization of CHAT. And
what's CHAT stand for?
CHAT's Chico Housing Action Team, and CHAT is amazing, and I have to put a plug for them anywhere I can. They're the ones that are doing Simplicity Village and the small houses. But in the last 5 years, I mean, they've just done some amazing things. I think they've housed about 90 people. What they do is basically, or what they have been doing, is master leases on houses where they lease a house, and then how homeless folks apply for placement in that house. They pay a percentage of whatever their income is, and then CHAT provides kind of ongoing support to make sure that they can stay there.
So they kind of own the lease, and then they kind of sublease. It's sort of a sublease. It's
sort of a sublease. I mean, I don't think. Okay. I don't even know. I don't know all the details. That I don't know that they ever make the money back that they're paying on leases. But they are providing. I mean, it's essentially just homegrown permanent supportive housing is what it is. And it's really astonishing, because there is another organization that was just a handful of volunteers who were concerned and tried to figure out what they could do about it. And they invented it as they went along, and they've been astonishingly successful. So Safe Space was kind of under the umbrella of CHAT, but CHAT is very much focused on that more permanent housing piece. And Safe Space had become more and more of a draw on them. So last year, Safe Space became our own 501(c), and so this was the first year that we operated, and it was a very nutty year. We got our paperwork and became our own nonprofit in early fall, and then the campfires hit. A lot of the churches that we normally use were housing evacuees, and so it's been a chaotic year.
What was the charter back then, 5 years ago, versus today? Is it pretty much stayed the same, or is it morphed since you guys have kind of tore off from chat?
Yeah. So frankly, I mean, the charter has always been at its most basic level is just to make sure that nobody dies on the streets at night if we can help it of exposure. I mean, that's the basic thing. On the coldest winter nights, we want to have people off the streets as much as we can. Yeah,
because you guys aren't open year-round.
Right. And so, I think it's been in the minds of all the board members that at some point we'll expand. At the very least, we'd like to expand to year-round shelter. But we also want to be able to expand services, because the way it works now is people come to intake. We have intake at a set location a few blocks from the Jesus Center. People come to intake at about 5:30 in the evening, and then they get bussed over to whatever shelter is hosting us, or whatever church is hosting us that night.
Okay, so it rotates on a nightly basis then?
Weekly. So it's usually a new church every week. I think First Christian usually hosts us for 2 weeks, and they're amazing. But most of the time, we're going to a different shelter each week. And so anyway, by the time people get there, they get there, between 6:30 and 8. There's a hot dinner, and then people go to bed. And at 7 in the morning, they're bussed back downtown to the Jesus Center for breakfast. So there's not a lot of opportunity for case management. There's not a lot of opportunity for intervention. It's incredibly limiting. So down the road, really, our goal is to figure out how we go from just sheltering to actually moving people forward. Yeah,
I mean, that's got to put a lot of logistical constraints on you guys for what you can do in terms of case management, like you're saying.
It's huge. Yeah, I mean, people really, they pretty much just get a meal and go to sleep, and then they're gone.
Because just like IT infrastructure to track people and be able to do that is pretty much impossible to do, right?
Yep.
Okay, that's starting to make more sense to me now. The charter today is pretty much the same, though?
It's evolving a lot. I mean, even before the campfire, in our initial conversations, the board had said that we wanted to figure out how to expand services, and so again, it was just a chaotic year. A new board, dealing with campfire, with loss of churches. Everybody has been scrambling, and then the Walmart money came along, and that seemed like an amazing opportunity to actually move people out of homelessness rather than just having them there overnight.
Mm-hmm.
And so we all shifted gears for that, and since that's changed in the last couple of weeks, we're shifting gears again, and I don't know where we land. I mean, I think ultimately, though, the goal is to move towards where we can provide more comprehensive services.
With Campfire, I think I know the answer to this question, but how did the Campfire affect you guys? Like, what was the tangible blowback from it?
I mean, the most obvious thing was that we lost access to churches, either because they were hosting evacuees already. One of the churches, a week or two before we were supposed to go there, actually got rented by Paradise Unified School District. And so it was so that introduced a lot of chaos to what's normally been a pretty straightforward process.
Yeah.
And then the other side of that was, and I think, we still had about 400 volunteers this year. We have an amazing number of locals that show up and volunteer.
Quite a bit.
Yeah. But people were also facing volunteer fatigue this year before we started. I mean, they had been volunteering at all the shelters.
So that's a thing. Volunteer fatigue's a thing.
Absolutely.
It makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about any of us, we've only got so much time and energy with our lives.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason that dealing with that 20% of the 1% that I've been talking about is a challenge, because you're largely a volunteer workforce, and somebody comes in with a severe addiction problem or is violent. You don't want to put your volunteers through that and having to deal with that. And it's like they fall out of the they fall out of the net, basically. They fall through.
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth on that is such a rare occurrence. I mean, we have pretty clear processes, and every night we have a core ops team for people that are rotate shifts.
Yeah.
And those folks are available throughout the night. So even though they're not spending the night there, if any volunteers has any problems, that's their first call, unless it was obvious that it rose to, you should call the police.
So where the reason I even got in this kind of hit my radar as being important to me came from a very selfish place. And I think I talked to Rob about it, but I fly fish a lot. I'm on the river a lot, and I see encampments along the river. So when you say it's a rare occurrence, I hear what you're saying, and that's probably true inside your organization. But what compels someone to go set up encampments under those living conditions when they have options like Safe Space and Torres Shelter and Jesus Center?
It's a huge spectrum of issues. We've got something as simple as Grant. He was a fixture downtown, and he died a couple of days ago.
I heard about that, yeah.
And I loved him. He was such a great guy, and we've had a ton of conversations about him and the possibility of him coming to Safe Space. But one of his big issues was that he was really uncomfortable with crowds and with groups. And so feeling packed in there and kind of stuck just triggered a lot of emotional problems for him. So we've got that. There are a lot of, and I know Joy's working on moving away from that, but there are a lot of requirements relatively in the other two shelters that are in town. And so, there's requirements for sobriety. You get tested when you come in.
Yeah.
And if you can't pass that, then you're not in. And so that's a real basic one. A lot of times people can't stay together. So you have your chosen family. That's an issue.
Yeah, I mean, people want to hang out with who they know. We're tribal by nature.
Right.
That makes sense.
And it feels safer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's all those things. And I think some people just feel they don't want to be beholden. They want they want to have a sense of autonomy. And to some extent, no matter how any of us do this, I was just talking about this with someone yesterday. You want to respect people's autonomy as much as you possibly can. And the system is somewhat set up. It's patriarchal. It's dictated to you what's best for you. And that can be hard to swallow, especially if you're not ready for it and you're not there.
Yeah.
And you've got to talk about stability. People are unstable in the first place.
Yeah. I get autonomy and being and having some freedoms, personal freedoms. I get that. But when their actions if you go to Sacramento and you look at the Garden Highway area, especially the industrial section of the Garden Highway, and you see just acres upon acres of tarps, all that refuse is going into the river and it's going downstream. This is, stuff that's imposing on, basic human rights in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So I get that there's autonomy, but there's also, we also live in a civil society governed by laws. The laws are there for a reason. It's difficult to kind of parse in my mind, like what the right solution is. 'Cause I understand their motivation for personal freedom, but at the same time, we can't live like animals.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the reality of it is, though, I throw out all those reasons because I want people to get the full picture. But also the reality of it is that if we tomorrow rounded up everybody that was living in the creeks and the waterways and anywhere in Chico, if we round those folks up, what are we going to do with them? We've got, last count, we don't have the latest pit count out, but we've got something like 1,200 people. I'm betting that we have more. We've seen more trickling down with the fire. And so anyway, we don't have jail cells if we wanted to lock them up. We don't have shelter beds. We don't have the infrastructure at all. We don't have the case management. We don't have a medical detox. We're just utterly lacking. And so I feel like we have to get those things in place if we want to address the issues. And
yeah, do you feel like these folks that are compelled to, they're kind of ruining it for everybody. right? They're renting it for the 99%, but they're also renting it for a large part of their cohort, right? And
but I feel like it's even a smaller percentage than that. I mean, I feel like there are some folks that are. I mean, we've got some folks that are just criminals, and that's the reality. And I'll be curious when you talk to somebody from the police department what their take is on that. But we've got people down in the creeks that are living. I mean, I don't know where else they're supposed to go. I mean, assuming that they cannot get sheltered now. They are not supposed to stay in the park. They're not supposed to stay in the creeks. They're not supposed to stay under bridges. Where are they supposed to stay? Somebody finds them in their backyard, they're going to chase them out. There is no place. And so those hidden spots become kind of the only viable option. And we're all frustrated with it. I mean, I'm with you. I'm very concerned about the environment. I'm very concerned about our waterways. It's a mess. And we've got to do better, but I don't think that I don't see any option right now.
So are you saying that because there's not enough beds, this is why this is happening?
Why they're in the creeks?
Yeah.
I think that is a big proportion of why it's happening. I mean, I think that we're very much missing that low barrier component that gets people in. And we see this over the course of Safe Space every winter, and it kills us. Because sometimes just those, and so as little as we offer, a nightly bed and a meal, as little as that, we'll see people stabilize over the course of the 3 months that we operate. And then they'll ask us, well, now what's next? You guys are closing. We've had people say, like, I'm ready to get off drugs, and we don't have places to refer them. We don't have enough shelter beds. And that's where it just kills us. And that's where we have been so desperate to figure out some kind of low barrier alternative, because it really is stabilizing for people. And you kind of get people past the bottom of the Maslow hierarchy where they're just trying to get food and a bed.
So is this why there's that push for housing, like for everybody, like get them in this house? It's like that's kind of like the baseline continuity that they need to kind of get back to a space where they can self-actualize, I guess is the right word.
Yeah, no, that is a huge component of housing first. Is like, okay, let's just get a roof over somebody's head, get those very basic needs met, and then we evaluate. And and again, I mean, the stability is huge. I think it's easy for people to say, gosh, why don't they go get a job? Why don't they do this? Why don't they do that? But when you are going around, like, part of your day is spent migrating from place to place to get your basic needs met.
Yeah.
And then, you're trying to find a place where nobody's going to chase you out of, that you can actually get some sleep for the night. And a lot of people don't sleep because they're scared. They're up and down all night because they're worried about somebody preying on them, or the police come, or somebody moves them along. And so they're just operating at this really barely functional level.
Primal level, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you had all the money in the world, budget-wise, to do what you needed to do, what sort of things do you put in place so that people don't feel compelled or pushed to live, on Creekside?
So there's a lot of components to that, but I mean, if we had all the money in the world, I think outreach is huge.
What do you mean by that?
We need teams to go out and talk to people and really analyze, like, what do they need to get them to come into low barrier shelter. And we need their trust. We need to have a relationship with them. And that's one of the things that I've loved, and I think our whole team loves about Safe Space, is that over the course of those 3 months, we have relationships with people, and they come back, and we see them around town. And unfortunately, I would say 50 to 60% of the people that we see year after year. These are chronically homeless folks that, if they could stay with us the rest of the year, and they would. And that would give us this opportunity to actually figure out what it's going to take. Yeah,
there's probably a group of listeners, though, that are probably not liking the idea of just letting people stay there year after year, because it doesn't, challenge them or push them in a, from a case management perspective through a process that hopefully gets them to be self-sustaining members of society.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the core of the low barrier shelter model, if it's used as it's supposed to be with housing first principles, from entry on, the whole point is to get people housed.
Yeah.
I mean, they really shouldn't be staying there year after year. When I say we see them year after year, we're operating for 12 weeks. And so,
Right.
so, we haven't had that opportunity to say, okay, now we put you in touch with, now we have a case manager that's assigned to you.
Would you say that you get your organization probably deals more with those folks that are inclined to be living Creekside than most, because they have to by necessity? They can't live. Obviously, they can't live there when there's a bunch of water pushing through.
Yeah,
and it's super cold outside. So okay.
Very much so. I mean, those are the folks that we have always served, and folks that got kicked out of the other shelters for a variety of reasons, whether it's mental health, whether it's addiction issues, whether it's pets, whether it's being combative. We get that kind of whole myriad group of issues, and we've been really effective. And we've modeled this after a shelter in Davis that's been doing this, and it's entirely student run, actually.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's a really great model. But we've followed their model, and we've been really good at de-escalation. I mean, we were looking at the number of incidents that we've had where somebody had to be asked to leave the shelter, and crunching the numbers this year, and it's 0.014%. I mean, it almost never gets to that point. It's usually we can talk to somebody, and the times that it's been to that point, it hasn't been threats or violence. It's been that somebody couldn't calm down, and usually that's a mental health issue,
like a psychotic break of some sort.
Right.
Okay.
We've not once in 5 years had an issue of violence in the shelter. It's almost always been that just somebody just can't get control of themselves, and we can't get them over to even behavioral health has no beds. They have something like 14 beds or maybe 16. And I think 4 of those are reserved for the jail. So there's nothing. Even if they get over there, they give them some meds, they stabilize them, and they're back out on the street the next day, and the meds get lost. They disappear. They don't get taken. And that's another component of managing these cases too. And that's one that has really killed us, is that we'd like to see, if a lot of folks, it feels like if somebody was helping them manage that medication piece, that would be this huge leap forward right there in stability.
Just the medication.
Yeah, I mean, just
piece.
getting somebody on their meds and having somebody that's checking in with them, making sure they're getting them.
It gets back down to case management,
Yep.
which we've been hammering on, for the last 3, and I'm sure it'll come up again when I talk to Laura. But I was told that it sounds like you guys are all going to be on the same case management system. Is that right?
We're working towards integrating HMIS. And for us, that's a lot more limited at this point. Once we get an actual location, whether it's 3 months or whether it's year round, we are going to start working on actually being able to enter this information, because we feel like it's imperative that we're sharing some of this information.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, you're dealing with a transient population. They're not going to come to the same place every time.
Right.
You need to be able to track them.
Right. And if they've gotten kicked out somewhere else, there's no way for us to know a lot of the time.
Yeah.
The way that it's been, we're not communicating effectively.
Yeah. Well, what's the strategy? Because you guys, I would call it a pop-up shelter, if you will. What's the strategy, since you have no IT infrastructure really? I'm assuming it's going to be all on mobile apps, but how do you track the individual person? You don't LoJack them, but how do you,
Yeah.
What do you do? Is it a card?
Yeah, well, it probably will eventually be a card that somebody can check in with.
Okay.
But right now, I'm kind of envisioning it as that we will have mobile devices like an iPad, where we're just manually entering people in. It's all been on paper the last several years, and that's, we at the end of the year, we try to at least put those in a spreadsheet so that we can look at our numbers. But that's not effective, and it's not effective for us sharing that data.
And exactly. From a transparency perspective, that's where it gets a little tough to do. You spend more time trying to build reports for people and not doing your real jobs.
Right.
Okay. So what are two of the biggest misconceptions that the public has about your organization? If there's more, let go.
So,
I'm just like,
I mean, I would say that the number one thing that I hear is that where Safe Space has been, that there have been increases in crime.
They're within the local area.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I'm waiting for this. We actually have somebody at Chico State pulled our data, and they pulled the data from the fire or the police department for the last 8 years, and then they
just
figured
like the blotter or something. Makes sense.
And then they've mapped it out where we were on what dates and crimes. And last that I spoke to them, they said that they weren't seeing any difference. But we don't have those final numbers yet. Hopefully that will show what we think. But at Safe Space, there's no in-out privileges. Once it's typically about 9 o'clock. People are in for the night, and they're not allowed to leave the property. If they get caught leaving the property, then they're not allowed to come back to Safe Space. We're utterly reliant on the goodwill of the neighborhood that's hosting us. I mean, it's really if something goes wrong and the church gets complaints, then they're not going to host us.
It'll kill that relationship.
Yep. And so we've done this for 5 years, and we've gone back to the same churches again and again. And I think it speaks to how successful we've been. And it's not perfect, but it's not perfect in that we have little issues but it's more often like a plugged toilet. We've said 0.014% of the time we've had people leave, and that's just highly unusual.
Where how do you guys get your funding?
It is all donations. We're 100% donation based. We did get a grant this year from North Valley Community Foundation that was to cover some of the bedding. When the fires first broke out, we donated. We have mats and bedding and pillows, all those things. We donated those to one of the churches, or we didn't donate them intentionally. We gave them to one of the churches to use, and in the chaos, they disappeared. And so we had to replace all of our stuff at the beginning of the year. So we got about $17,000 grant from North Valley Community Foundation to help us cover that cost. But other than that, it's all small fundraisers. I can't think of the name of it. Maltese has been really, really supportive. They host fundraisers for us really regularly. We've had some musicians, and just tons of organizations have stepped up.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the PIT surveys and the HMIS data, what that means for case management. So I don't want to go over ground we've already covered with Joy and with Rob, but I think there are some questions that are relevant in terms of your perspective, your take on these questions. And so the first one's like in order of frequency. What are the main issues that are contributing to homelessness in Chico? Well, in Butte County, for example, addiction, mental health, financial, criminal history. How would you rank them?
I mean, it's really tough to put a number on it, and that is going to be information that will be interesting to see. I feel like we're in this perfect storm. Economically, we have become, before the fire, we had a 1.5% vacancy rate locally. And so,
what do you mean in terms of just overall housing, or okay,
overall housing?
Yeah, okay.
And so that it was already a struggle for people on the bottom of those margins.
Yeah.
And we've got data that shows that most Americans, the majority of Americans, can't handle a $2,000 emergency. And families are increasingly fragmented. So all of that, it feels like the people that were on the bottom of the pile are getting pushed over the edge. And we see that, with disabled people, particularly people with set incomes. We've seen a number of people that were elderly or disabled that had a very limited income, and if something happens to their housing, they literally don't have money.
Yeah, I mean,
to something else.
This point you're making is my chief concern about our national economy as a whole. As you know, IT, we're all about automation, and there's a lot of jobs that are going to be displaced due to automation, whether it be robots or computer algorithms, machine learning algorithms things like, I would call them the low rung white collar jobs that are, I said this on, I think, a previous episode, but if you're doing accounting, low end accounting stuff, bookkeeping, that job's probably going to go away. And to your point, if people are living on the cusp of poverty to begin with, and then something like that happens and they can't retrain, it's going to be a huge problem. So I look at the homeless problem from that perspective as kind of like the canary in the coal mine for some stuff that could happen. You stole
what I was going to say. Yeah. I do feel like these folks are the canaries in the coal mine.
Yeah.
And that's part of this perfect storm, and the other part of that is the opioid epidemic and meth here locally. I think meth is really on the uprise all over the country, but particularly here. And so, we see a lot of people struggling with addiction, and there's not a clear answer for that. We're particularly poorly equipped to handle it here because we don't have a medical detox facility.
Yeah.
And, I hear a lot of people say, well, just, we'll set up a community court and we'll tell them that they have to get clean or they're going to go to jail. And they can go to outpatient services, and that's probably going to work for a really tiny percentage of folks, but it'll work for some folks. But the majority of people that are living on the streets, just because you told them that, it's self-medication too. They're miserable, and it's just about impossible to really turn that around. And in addition, it's a stick without a real stick. We don't have, for all the people that will fail, we don't have a jail for them.
Yeah, and the folks that refuse to get help, the ones that you're talking about, the fallout, they refuse to get help. Again, that I feel that's their right. They can do that. But when it encroaches on my personal world and my friends' worlds, and it's making, people anxious to walk across the park or whatever it may be, that's when it kind of, there's a line drawn, and it's like, how do you deal with that? Do you put them in jail indefinitely?
Yeah. Honestly, I feel like Portugal has been the best model for this.
Explain. Yeah.
So they basically legalized all those drugs. Well, it's not actually legal. That's not really accurate. It's just no longer, you're not going to go to jail. Right.
Okay.
And so at that point, though, they required people when they're caught with drugs, they go to kind of a peer group. It's not really a court so much as just a group where they talk about the issue, and they offer them alternatives.
So like the nature of the addiction, basically? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And Vancouver is another one that they've actually made it legal. Like people can get prescriptions for heroin, and you go to the safe shooting site and you can get your heroin every day. And on the kind of the face of that's horrifying, right? None of us wants to enable an addict.
I'm thinking to myself, how the fuck does that get somebody
right
to the through to the other side from a case management perspective? It seems like it's two steps back.
Yeah, and so what Vancouver's experiment has shown is that once you start doing that, once people have a clean, safe place to do it, they're initially there's a little bump in their usage.
Okay,
and then
that makes sense.
And then they start to tail. It levels out, and for most people, it starts to go down. And most people then end up like once it's going down, once they have that they know where their fix is coming from. They are a lot more functional, and even the people that are still using to some extent are getting jobs and are getting housed. And I said, and the nature of it is that it tends to tail off. And if you look at it, I've actually been reading this great book called The Scream, and they were talking about this, and really the rise in addiction in America and in dangerous addiction really kind of comes into play when we made it illegal to use drugs.
Yeah, the thing, something you said was interesting. If you know where your next fix is coming, that sense of urgency to go and get the money to buy the thing that you're trying to do goes down.
Right.
And if you're doing illicit things to acquire the money in the first place, like breaking into somebody's garage, stealing their fly rods, for example, if that's no longer Okay, I can see. It's kind of it's just so like
It's counterintuitive.
difficult for me to
I
to
know.
embrace that, but I mean I can kind of understand the logic in it, and then I see two outcomes: either that person slowly weans themselves off, or they just go into a bunny hole and they die.
Right, and I mean, I think
Are there a lot more addictions in these areas where they do full legalization?
So I don't know.
Overdoses. I said addictions. I meant overdoses.
I was going to say I don't know what the addiction rates look like, but overdose deaths drop dramatically in both Portugal and in Vancouver.
Why? That's so counterintuitive.
Right. I mean, I think I don't know. And some of it. I mean, gosh, I can't remember where I saw this or heard this. But they're talking about this experiment that they did with rats, and this is fairly recent, but they give, a rat in a cage, they give them 2 bottles. One has heroin water and one has water, and the rat in the cage chooses heroin water and becomes addicted and will just do it until they die. And then another cage it's like a rat wonderland. They have tons of rats in there. They're friendly. They have toys. They have balls. They have, those running wheels. And they have a bottle of plain water and a bottle of heroin water. The rats in the cage that's I can't think of the term I'm looking for, but it's an enhanced cage, an enhanced environment. They don't get addicted. They just don't. It's almost zero.
Do they try it and then switch back to regular Coke?
Yeah, I mean, I think water, but
well, I mean, it's a Pepsi Coke analogy.
Yeah, I mean, and they may use it occasionally, but they said that they just don't.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, more and more of this evidence is building up that they're being punitive isn't working. I think we all know that right now.
Well, I mean, it puts a huge drain on our emergency response teams. But it is such a tough thing to parse.
I know, I agree. I mean, and we're particularly bad at this in America. I think it's kind of this flip side. To me, it feels like it's this flip side to the American ethos, which is like what's great about America. Well, I mean, one thing that's great about America is that we have a sense that we can all pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and better ourselves and change our lives and make and that's like this lovely thing about our country. But the flip side of that is if somebody fails to do that, then it's
You're
their
vilified.
fault. Right. Like you must not have done it right because other people could do it.
Yeah.
And it's not so clear cut.
Yeah, well, I think people have a visceral reaction to it because it flies in the face of democracy in a lot of ways and capitalism in a lot of ways. And I think it's shows the shortcomings of those two types of systems personified,
Right.
And I think that's why people have a visceral reaction to that. And also, it does really impact them on a day-to-day basis, whether they see it or walk through it or whatever, so it's a very tangible thing. It's like a backyard issue.
Yeah.
It's in my backyard kind of an issue.
I have to say though, I mean, I've been hesitant to say this, and I'm going to say it anyway. I don't want to minimize people's concerns about safety. Chico has become, crime has risen. And so I said, I don't want to minimize that. And I don't want to tell people that that's not the case. I don't want to gaslight anyone. But on the other hand, it also feels like this is blown out of proportion to some extent. I ride my bike in the park regularly. I walk in the park. I mean, I do it by myself quite often.
I agree. I do agree. I think social media is largely to blame with that. I've always said, to my friends that social media basically will take deviant behavior and normalize that behavior.
That's exactly
or make things just seem way worse than they actually are. But yeah, I mean, I walk my dog in 1 mile, and there, you'll run into an encampment now and again, but it's not rampant. I mean, I am biased in that I had lived in Santa Monica for 10 years, so I know, how bad it can go, and we're so far away from what Santa Monica is dealing with right now in downtown Los Angeles. So I'm a little, I would say, tempered that way. So I might have personal bias that way. So my, I guess my rubber band's been stretched
Yeah.
further than most when it comes to this topic. So I got a lot more bandwidth to stomach it.
Yeah, and you're right about the social media aspect of this because, nobody posts. I just certainly don't. I don't post every day what a lovely walk I had in the park.
Yeah.
You tend to post something awful happened and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe this.
Yeah, I mean,
so it heightens that sense of alarm and
we're drawn to car wrecks.
Yeah.
That's, ads are sold based on, if you look at the news today, it's 90% of it's negative.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you're looking at these issues, you're seeing stuff online, just like, maybe go down to these areas that people are freaking out about and put your own eyes on it before you jump to conclusions. Cause I think, having lived in the Bay Area for 10 years, having lived in LA for 10 years and then just moving back up here 3 years ago, Chico's a very special place. And I kind of chuckle when I see people go on these rants on social media saying they're going to move out of Chico. It's gone to shit, or they're leaving California. It's still one of the best places on the planet to live, I think.
I think so too. We're lucky. We just not to minimize that we have some real problems and
Absolutely.
real causes for concern, but
let's talk bed counts. I mean, this is interesting for you guys because you have the pop-up shelter, so your bed count fluctuates, I assume.
Yeah,
right?
so it's been typically like 50 to 75 depending on the size of the church.
And then do you have like a transport where there's cots or something in and it just goes to the next place, or is there cots already on site for these places you partner with?
We own all of our own cots and stuff, and actually they're mats. We used cots, and we still use a limited number of cots for people that are disabled that really can't get up and down.
Yeah.
But the cots broke so often and took up so much of our limited budget.
Yeah, makes sense. So you roll up a mat.
Yeah, they're
foam mat or something.
Yeah, they're thick. They're about I'm gonna say 2.5, 3 inches thick. Foam mats, and so we just stack them and move them to the next location.
Okay.
Last year we lucked out and somebody donated a box truck to us, and that's just been amazing because prior to that it was like try to foster, get people to bring pickups and we can move to the next church every week.
Are you guys pretty much at capacity every night when you're operating?
Yeah, I mean usually the first week it'll kind of ramp up slowly as people hear that we're open. But then it's been really typical for us to turn away 10 to 25 people a night. This year,
you have to sometimes.
Yeah.
So where did they go in those cases?
So this year we were much more effective with this. We've been trying to work things with Torres in particular the last couple of years, and this year they let us bring people after they were done accepting people. So because the time that they closed up from accepting new people coincides with the time that we were still checking people in.
Yep.
And so we wouldn't know necessarily if we had overflow until past our check-in time.
And this is why it's so important to be sharing this data.
Right.
So you guys got to have like an aggregate bed count.
Right. So this year we worked really closely with them and they altered that policy some for us. And so we would typically, after the bus took the last people to our location, they would bus whoever we had room for back over to Torres.
Were you able, between you and Torres, to cover the needs on those winter nights then? From a bed perspective?
No. We still had some people that we turned away, and when we turned them away, they're just going out trying to find some place for the night.
Is it just first come, first serve? They just come into a queue, or how does that work?
So if you were there the night before, you're already on our list.
Okay.
And so as long as you're there when we call your name at so you want to be there by 5:30 or so, then you've got your spot the next night.
Okay.
And so there's typically, I would say 90% of the people show up, 80 to 90% will keep their spots every night. Some people then don't show up or they've gone somewhere else. And so then that's when we bring new people in.
So is the reason you guys do it on a weekly basis as opposed to moving daily, it's really just logistically that part of the population not having to move around as much and chasing the service around town?
No, it's logistically for us. I mean, because we're all volunteer run, the only person that we pay, and it's, our budget has typically been around $25,000. It was more this year because of that grant from...
For the whole year, it's
Yeah.
For the 3 or 4 months you're operating.
Yeah,
Okay.
we house people.
Pretty small
typically-
operational budget then.
Yeah, I mean, we house people for $3 a night per person.
Okay.
We don't have any paid staff. And so the only person that we pay is the bus driver. And that, I think was $17,000 of our budget this year. So it's a huge percentage. But that moving people and moving the things, the mats, the medicines, the plates, just everything. That takes up so much volunteer time.
It's kind of like a catering service, really. And everything that would go into a catering service to move it from point A to point B.
Right. And
applies.
To do that with no paid employees, it's just we couldn't move every night. And
makes sense. And then back to the fatigue, the volunteer fatigue thing that you said. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see, where are we here?
I actually wanted to get back to one thing that we missed.
Yeah. Thanks for keeping me on track.
No, I just missed it because I think we got off a little bit here. Main issues contributing to homelessness.
We started that and then kind of, zigged and zagged.
Yeah, 2 other things about that. I just want to talk about mental health because I feel like that is huge. Yeah,
because I think your first one was basically economic, just right, mostly around money.
Right. So we got economic
access
issues.
To money.
We got addiction and mental health, and I bet 80% of the people that are on the streets have some level of mental illness.
Absolutely. I don't think anyone really voluntarily wants to live in those conditions. I just don't. If you're in your right mind, it just doesn't make sense.
Right. And so there may be there may be cofactors there. They might have an addiction in addition to that. And they might have been on the edge of things economically, but mental health is probably the number one issue, and we're as a society broadly and here locally, we don't have the facilities, we don't have the case management, we're not dealing with it well. And it goes all the way back to the mental hospitals closing under Reagan.
Yeah, I was just about to mention that.
Yeah, we just don't have the facilities, and we're not putting time into it. And
I strongly feel that this should be a national thing, and being talked about for during the election is getting some sort of federal system back in place.
I agree. It's so out of control. And it's so unfair. It's cruel. And a lot of the things that when we talk about people's sense of safety in our community, a lot of the people that are mentally ill are contributing to that. And it's not that they're going to do anything. It's not that they are violent, but they're not controlling themselves well. The guy that screams at you when you're walking down the street, he's probably not dangerous, but he's not handling his life well, and he needs treatment.
Yeah, but if you you live in a 4-bedroom home and you're not used to seeing that, and it happens, it's very jarring. I've had that happen to me. I've been put in very anxious positions.
I agree.
And it's not comfortable. And I'm 6'3" and 260 pounds. I can't imagine if it's a gal that's 5'5" and 120.
Yeah, I agree. And again, I think because I've been doing this now for 3 years, I know a lot of these folks, and so it's just less alarming. I know the population better, and that's one of the things I love about Safe Space, is that we have 400 volunteers a year. We have a lot of people that actually get to know people, and it does make it seem most of the time, and there are times that I've been alarmed too. But most of the time, it makes it feel less harrowing when you see somebody that you know a little bit about, that they're really losing it.
Oh, that's just Uncle Rick going crazy.
Right.
During Thanksgiving.
There's some element
he's fine
of that.
Most of the time. It's the other 364 days of the year he's fine.
Yeah.
Just let him do his thing.
Yeah. There's some understand knowing people a little bit. I don't know. You can't help but develop a little sense of empathy, but also a little less fear. And and I said it's not always misplaced, but most of the time it's not that.
Yeah, it's tough for me to reconcile in my mind, because everything is about an upstanding citizen of the community having to make a bunch of reconciliations in order to, fit in with the social dynamic of what's being caused by a very small percentage of the population. There's no quid pro quo, and I understand why, because I think those folks just don't have the toolkit available to function in a normal kind of like a, you do this for me and I'll do this for you kind of a transactional thing.
Yeah, I know. I mean, yeah, I mean, I really feel a lot of that too, but on the other hand, it's the reality.
Yeah.
And so ignoring it or demonizing people or, putting people in jail is not going to solve it. So that's where it falls apart for me. It's like, I really get it.
Yeah,
But we're not gonna wish it away. It's not gonna disappear because we're angry or because we're scared. So now what?
Yeah, I was hoping that this series we would have 5 podcasts and I'd be able to solve world homeless, and I'm very frustrated. It was a very small goal, stretch goal, you could call it. I just still, I can, in the limited amount of time I've been kind of like wrapping my head around this problem, it's very difficult, and I don't know what the answer is. I really don't. I haven't really heard a good answer yet.
I don't know if there is one. I really don't. I feel like this is all going to be a variety of.
Yeah.
It's going to have to be a variety of answers.
Yeah. It's the problem is it's not like, hey, we've got this river and we need to build a bridge to span the bridge. Like there's a very tangible thing we're trying to do, and there's a very solid benchmark for when we're done. It's like when cars start going over the bridge, project's done, let's move on. And I think the homeless problem cannot be boxed in and thought about as a public works project, because it's not. It's this thing that it's an organism, really, and it's a plant that needs food. But from a reverse side, you want to kind of slowly contract the services or the things that are contributing to that plant's reverse growth, I guess. I don't know. Does that make sense?
No, it absolutely makes sense.
Being weird, but
no, I mean the ideal is that this always gets beat over. We always get beat over the head with this homeless industrial complex thing. But the reality is, I think everybody that I know in Chico, we'd be freaking thrilled if we got worked out of a job. Like,
yeah, but I don't think that's going to go away. And I think that if people think that they can eradicate it, and then it's a pipe dream. It's always going to be there. It's just part of the human condition. There's always somebody that's at the lowest rung of the social strata, and they're always going to.
Right.
It's always going to be an issue. It's like, if we need water to everybody's homes, it's kind of like a public works kind of a thing. Public,
right.
Infrastructure almost just needs to be there. We're dealing with, part of humanity that don't have the tools set to help themselves. It's always going to be like that. It's just, can you put things in place to maybe mitigate it over time and minimize it over time? It's always going to be there though, and maybe slowly starve it.
I mean, and to me, it feels also like this is, what contributes to this too is what we've seen. I don't know how old you are, but in my lifetime,
I'm old,
coming on 50. I mean, the communities used to be better at handling this internally. Like there used to be, I think, a little more sense of a social contract, and maybe, the odd guy was sort of, everybody accepted that he was the odd guy and he did odd things, but you knew him a little bit. And so we've lost that. That's gone. I mean, it doesn't feel to me most of the time like we're looking out for each other. And the people that are really on the bottom, really nobody's looking out for them. They just become
I don't know. I mean, you said you had 400 volunteers, right? I mean, there's people that care about it. It's just, it's not like everybody's top priority. A lot of people are dealing with their own shit.
That's true.
They deal with those backyard issues, and that's what's important to them. Or they're starting a new family, and that's what what's important to them.
Yeah.
I mean, your own story of how you got into it, right?
Right.
Serendipitous, I would say.
Yeah, it's true.
driven by something. He needed to hit a quota for, and then look where you are now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I don't think that, I don't know, there's just as much as people's perception of safety, and they're not as safe. I mean, I think there's people that care and are willing to help, really do.
Yeah.
I want to believe that anyway. Okay, let's switch it up to case management, because I feel like this is the stuff that it's tangible. We can actually control this.
Right.
This is a controllable element in this whole thing, and it gets down to basically being able to shepherd somebody through a process of recovery, if you will.
Right.
So describe your implementation of the case management system within your organization today, and then also like what the plan is for the future.
So I mean, the way it is today is really ad hoc, because we have such limited time with folks, and they're pretty much sleeping, and then they're delivered back to the Jesus Center in the mornings. We've done very little case management. We occasionally have had families, veterans, people that we knew. Mm-hmm. We had resources, and we could get them into housing pretty quickly. So that's happened occasionally, but until we get more infrastructure, we're not equipped to do case management. And that was one of the huge things about the Orange Street shelter for us, was the opportunity to have, like, behavioral health had said, verbally, we didn't have it writing, but they had said that they would try to have somebody there 10 hours a day. So maybe from, noon to 10 p.m. That would be huge, having somebody that's actually, we do basic training and, de-escalation and good intentions, but that doesn't really address people's core mental health issues. So we need that piece of it.
Does the HMIS system that you guys are going to be using, does it have good mobile apps? Is it going to be something that will add value to your organization based on the nature of how you guys operate?
I think as we are operating now, the big thing will be that we can share information with the other two shelters.
Yeah.
And so
it's going to be huge, and the police department also, because they're a part of this.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if we can share some level of case information, so we have somebody there that we can then pass on and say, this person needs to see a social worker. This person needs to go to mental health.
Shunt them to the right resource.
Right.
Yeah.
That part of it will be huge.
Yeah. I mean, I can't understate how important the case management piece is, and you guys sharing data is going to be awesome.
Yep.
And you're an IT person. In terms of managing the patient's needs, is even patient the right word? And it's probably not. How, kind of from the case management perspective from your side, is it really just about IDing what the likely cause is and routing them to the appropriate care provider, or does it go deeper than that?
Well, so I mean, at the most limited level, yeah. I mean, if we can identify quickly and easily a certain problem, then and route it to somebody, then yeah, that's simple, and simple to manage. Most of the time, though, for us, it's been really developing the relationships. I mean, we see folks this night after night. Mm-hmm. The core group of us who are there volunteering several days a week really get to know people. We have real conversations, and that kind of fleshes it out for us. And so at that point, it's a lot different, and we can appreciate the complexity, whether somebody needs to be on their meds, whether they have, what other mental health issues do they have? Are they afraid, like Grant was? Are they uncomfortable with being in a crowded environment? How can we? So that gives us, those relationships give us a lot more tools to think about how we can manage folks. And if we can also be passing or sharing that information with other service providers, that's huge.
Okay. In terms of transparency for the general public, have you guys talked, the three organizations, have you guys talked about publishing reports, either automating the reports some way for somebody to go to a website and kind of get an idea of, looking at trends? Are we trending up in beds? Are we trending down in beds? Things like that. Yeah. I think, this would do a lot to, influence public perception, especially if it's raw data that is put into a digestible way.
Right.
Because right now I think people make assumptions and assert things based on little or no data.
Yeah. So yes, that is ideal, and we want to move towards that. On the other hand, it'll be really, to some extent, I guess, generic or aggregated data. I mean, we can't have anything that breaches the privacy of
No,
clients
I
or
would
guests.
want to see anonymized aggregate data, like really
Right.
high level stuff. You know,
Right.
basically strategy type
Yeah.
level data, not
Right.
not concerned with the individual
Yeah.
person.
I mean, once we start using HMIS, then that gets a lot easier because you can generate a lot of reports out of there that show a lot of this data. It's
What's the timetable for getting onto that platform?
really depends. I mean, so again, just because we're 2 weeks out from shifting gears with Orange Street Project, our
Yeah.
board really hasn't hammered all of this out yet. I mean, I think our goal, our primary goals with our budget and fundraising in this coming year is to get a permanent location, or at least semi-permanent for the winter, so that we're not moving everything every week still. And so that's a number one financial goal. The other one is that we'd like to be able to pay some overnight staff.
Mhm.
As it stands now, those are the shifts that tend to fall through. People don't sign up for them. We all have lives, and it's a hard shift to fill. So we'd like to be able to actually pay some folks for that. Those are our two primary goals. HMIS is after that. So it really depends on fundraising and energy levels. And everybody on my board, I want to say, because we get asked a lot why we don't do this or that. Everybody on my board, I think except for one person, has a full-time job. And a lot of us are working more than full-time. I'm self-employed, and that means I work when I'm needed. Rick is the head of the ops, and he's a professor at Chico State. And so at certain times of the year, he's really pressed. So anyway, the point being that our capacity as we operate now is limited. So we have to raise more funds in this coming year, and we're just now shifting our attention to that.
Are you guys going to be eligible for HUD funds if you use the HMIS system? Is that how it works? Because
Yeah.
I know from Joy's org, yes. I think she said that on the last show. Is it the same for you guys?
Yes and no. I mean, we will be eligible for some HUD funds, but we'll be more. They're kind of. I don't know if you've heard the supernova thing.
No.
But basically, it looks like COC is going to aggregate a whole bunch of grants.
And what's COC stand for?
Butte Community of Care. It's Butte COC. Continuum of Care.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And they manage. They're kind of the high level. They manage all of the programs in the county, and they administer all the state and federal funds that come into our county. And so they are putting out the last round of funding, that HEAP funding that came in, which was the $4.9 million that we got after the emergency shelter declaration. They put out an RFP for that.
Request for proposal.
Yes. And so everybody got their proposals in, and we had actually, working with the Jesus Center, had been allocated $450,000 of that towards the Orange Street Shelter project. When the Jesus Center pulled out, that went back to the COC, and so now it's being bundled into a new RFP that will just kind of encompass all of the funding that's coming, that they know of, that's coming down the pipe. They're trying to do just one and consolidate it. So there's just a myriad of requirements.
Yeah. Are there people in the COC that are responsible for the individual case management?
No.
How does that work then? Like,
individual organizations hire their own providers.
Okay. So here's where it gets a little weird for me. If I go break my arm, and I think I talked to Joy about this. So if I break my arm, I go in, there's a process I go through and to come out the other end with a cast, and then ultimately pull the cast off. I'm dealing with one or two doctors. They're in tight, communication, and I may go to a radiologist across town, but I'm typically bouncing between one or two different locations. And they're all in the same system, and their goal is to get me healed. If you approach it, the homeless issue, for an individual as you would approach the broken arm scenario, it would require some continuity in care, chain of custody, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
You guys are all going to be on the same database, case management system, but is there somebody, a person, a caseworker, if you will?
Mm-hmm. I
think that's the right word, right? That kind of shepherds that person through the process, no matter what the touch points are. Is that in place? Will that be in place?
Sort of. Again, it's just dependent on the individual organization. So, the Jesus Center is a good example of, they've got Shelley Watson over there who is amazing. And, she goes in at the most basic level, like, do you have an ID?
Yeah.
I mean, and she really...
I hear what you're saying. And I would argue it's actually not your guys' responsibility to do that. I mean, to do the continuity piece of it. It's your responsibility to, when they breach your doors, to, collect as much data as you can about that person and make sure that they're kind of like within your sphere of influence. You're working with them, but there seems to be, you can put data into a system, but if you're not actually strategically using the data, then what's the point, right? So is there anything in the plan that you're aware of, to kind of, to have that shepherd through this process for all these human beings that are going to be touching all these different care providers?
Not that I'm aware of. And I mean,
has it come up before?
It's come up, but in individual conversations, and I haven't been attending a lot of the COC meetings. I feel like the COC is a bit dysfunctional, and I'm not sure how much of that is dictated by state policies and how much of that is our local, finding their footing. And really, I became more involved with the COC not too long before the fire, and that's thrown, it feels that it's felt very chaotic to me. And I would love to see, one of the things we've talked about is something like Housing Navigator. There was some funding that came down for somebody specifically to house people in the wake of the Campfire, and that program has gone away. But for all of us to have access, all of us who are working in this space to have access to a person like that would be huge. And, so for each individual organization, it's really difficult when, you're juggling, like, do I want to have, a social worker? And am I going to spend money on addiction treatment, or am I going to hire somebody that's going to look for housing? Like it's tough choices, and it's almost impossible to. And
it's got to be curated for each person that's in the system, because everybody's unique mix of ailments is different.
Right.
Right.
So I would love to see some kind of top down. Although
I think we're talking about a strategy.
Yeah. Although right. But then on the other hand, I suppose I have enough of a little bit of a libertarian in me that I have concerns about that limiting what we can do. I mean, there's a plus and a minus. I mean, as organizations, as small organizations operating like this, we can be agile and change direction when we need to, and be responsive. If somebody doesn't fit into some kind of broader framework, as a small organization, we could go, okay, so what do we need to do for this person? And so I have a little fear of, if it's all top down, if it's dictated, then are we unable to be responsive in those ways?
Yeah. I just see a need to have a human that's kind of shepherding him through, that has more of a macro view of the problem, I would say.
Right. Yeah.
I think you guys, you do have, obviously you're on the ground, right? You're there, you're the front lines, but someone needs to be able to like look at each one of the homeless people, as really a care problem to solve.
Right.
And I'm not sure, I'm kind of surprised there's nobody like that in the system right now. Maybe it's a little early.
Yeah. Well, it is, and I think strategies
still being formed.
Right?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Orange Street Project. It was on, now it's off, right?
Yes.
That's the short. And how did that all transpire?
Well, back in, I'm not sure if it was November or early December, Walmart had asked Laura over at the Jesus Center. They'd been in contact with her, and this was kind of when the encampment was on the Walmart property.
Right.
And so they had approached Laura, and they'd approached a lot of us, and we were all kind of doing some outreach, trying to figure out needs of folks that were staying out there. But then they asked Laura what she could identify as goals, what they could do to mitigate some of the issues. And she talked to Joy and I, but I mean, I think really she immediately went to, we really need low barrier shelter. And so at that time, and it just happened really quickly in days, maybe a week at the most, but I mean, I want to say it was 3 or 4 days. Walmart had sent out a press release, and they allocated $1 million specifically for Campfire funding. And then another $1 million was specifically for low barrier shelter and a collaborative of Jesus Center, Torres, and Safe Space. And so we all jumped in and started looking for locations. And I think Joy felt like she could better serve folks, and she'd have to speak for herself. I think she felt like she could better serve folks and do more outreach specifically within her organization. I think she didn't feel like she had the bandwidth to add this low barrier shelter. And so we allocated $135,000 to her of that money so that she could focus efforts on bringing in Campfire folks. And then Jesus Center and Safe Space moved forward looking for a location. There's tons of challenges there. As you can imagine, there's not very many locations, period. And a lot of the commercial properties that might have been available in the past weren't available because businesses were taking them over.
That were moving from,
move businesses from Paradise, governmental agencies, etc. The second challenge that we faced was finding property, was finding something that was relatively habitable with minimal tenant improvements. Because even though we first got that $1 million and we were like, woohoo, we can get some property, and this is
but if you got to put 600 into TIs, it's
exactly. And so one of the places that was really promising was the old North Valley Athletic Club over on Rio Lindo. And that's been suggested a lot, but it hasn't been occupied. I want to say I'm betting 10 years now. And it's moldy, black mold inside. The wires have been stripped from all the equipment. It's just, it would have been $250,000 to $300,000, and who knows, and months of work. The same thing, we looked at the Graduate very briefly, but that also, it's scheduled for demolition in a year.
Oh,
and
is it?
Yeah,
Okay.
and the owner's planning on bulldozing that and putting in an apartment complex. And so we said, sure, you could use it in the interim, but then there was another, $100,000 of just to get it back up to being habitable.
And then you're going to rip it down in a year.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
so there were those kinds of challenges, and then there's NIMBY. So we had spotted the Orange Street shelter. It's at, I want to say 388 Orange Street. We saw that, and we tried to talk to the owner, and he wouldn't have anything to do with us. And so I'm not sure who convinced him to actually talk to us, but kind of gradually we ended up having a series of conversations with him, and he really came to champion the project. It was, we were so lucky to have him on our team. And he really deals with it a lot down there already.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of folks sleeping in Depot Park. There's a lot of folks sleeping in his air conditioning staffed and under the stairs. And
we're talking about where the Amtrak station is, pretty much,
it's
right?
over,
That area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so he was already experiencing it and felt like this could make a difference, and felt like it could improve things for the downtown area generally. And that was one of the reasons. I mean, I think perhaps me more than anybody else loved the location, because I think it's unrealistic, at least for the population that we normally deal with. People said, well, put it in county land, put it outside of town, put it out at the airport. And even if we found something out there, people are not going to want to be bussed out there and isolated. They wouldn't come. So having something that was close enough to downtown that we could really draw people who were hanging out in the plaza all day and sleeping in alcoves at night, that it feels like the most viable solution and the most likely to get people to use our services. And in addition, we had planned on having we had a 24/7 hotline where people could call. No in-out privileges, as we've always done with Safe Space. So once you're in for the night, people said, well, gosh, college students will be stumbling home at 1 a.m. and this is a recipe for disaster. But the reality is our folks are not going to be out at night.
Yeah. So you guys stopped taking people at 9. Is that right?
Actually, we probably stopped taking people earlier, like 7.
Okay.
And then, and that hadn't been ironed out for a permanent location at our, the way we've traditionally done it. I think if they're not there by 6:30.
If, let's say it's 6:45, 7 hits, there's still 20 people outside, so they can't get in. Or do they just disperse, or do you put them on a bus and take them over to Torres?
So,
if Torres is available.
Yeah, so it wouldn't have worked out, and it still won't. If we have a permanent location, the goal was for that to be open 24/7, so that kind of eliminates that intake queue. People can come and go like once they've been checked in, and so, as we've seen with Safe Space previously, 80% to 90% of people are coming back the next night. And so once they got a card and got checked in, they don't have to, there's no queue. There's no standing in line waiting to get in like there has traditionally been. So we would expect to see a handful of people. But again, they're not restricted to coming in at 6:30. They could check in throughout the day.
Okay.
And so as long as they weren't outside of the time that we were admitting folks, they'd be able to get in. And we'd also planned on taking referrals both from downtown ambassadors and from the police department and university police. So if somebody had an issue, we planned on having reserved beds that people could come in later. And that's just part of that collaboration piece.
Yeah, because Joy was talking about that. Like if the cops clip somebody at 2 a.m,
right?
They'll call her sometimes and say, "Hey, do you have any spots before we throw this person in jail?"
Yeah.
Because they were just being drunk and disorderly or whatever, and we could use it for maybe a drunk driver instead.
Right.
And
Yeah, that was how we pictured that working. But anyway,
sounds like it's working.
Yeah, the Giovanni and the North Valley Community Foundation were shepherding this through, and we had a lot of pushback after the initial introduction at City Council. And I feel like we made some missteps there. One of the big ones for me was that I felt like we should have been more effective at our outreach prior to that. And that was really, really clear to me. I think it was clear to our whole team.
Yeah, like when the Chico State president kind of basically went on the record against it. Was this around the perceived, safety or lack of safety for the student population? And is that what you mean by the public outreach? Is maybe, tamping that down, that perception that
I think it's more about the education piece. We had met with Gail's team before, but she wasn't there. We had met with them before the council meeting. And so we talked to them, and they were really positive about the project, but weren't like, well, we're not sending you out of here with a letter. But it was a really positive conversation. And then after Joy's letter came out, we went back and talked to her, and I've since had another meeting with her. And I think that there's just a perception of low barrier shelter. I was at one meeting where somebody from one of the districts said to me, after we talked, she said, I was just picturing this building surrounded by junkies, and I think that it's a perception.
I think a lot of people do.
Yeah, I think that that's a perception issue, and so the more that we're able to inform people that there are still rules, and people aren't out wandering at night, and they're not shooting up around the corner, and the rules, as it has always been for Safe Space, the rules were, they applied within the shelter, but they apply outside the shelter too.
Yeah.
If you get caught 2 blocks away shooting up in somebody's yard, you're also not welcome back.
Yeah. Well, the thing I have difficulty reconciling is that a low barrier shelter does not mean that everybody can come in. There's still a minimum set of requirements that you need to meet, right?
Right.
And if you have one of these people that's beating on the door, they want in, they don't meet the requirements, and they're in a a residential area, what happens with that person? Like if I own a home across the street, that's my concern.
Yeah. So,
right.
So there weren't any homes across the street.
Well, I mean, this is what your typical, homeowner or renter's thinking.
Right. But so if somebody's banging on the door and really having an issue, I mean, at that point we would be calling the police the same as any other organization. I guess
let's just say that they're clearly under the influence of drugs, and that's one of the things that would basically forfeit them, right?
Nope.
No.
You can come in under the influence. Okay. You can't bring in drugs. You can't bring in paraphernalia.
Okay.
You can't bring in weapons. You have to be respectful. I mean, that's really that's almost the kind of core, like no violence, no threats, no guns, no drugs, no alcohol, and be respectful of each other, volunteers. And to a great extent, people police that themselves. Like they appreciate the space.
Yeah, Joyce said that too, actually.
I mean,
makes sense.
It's happened over and over.
So they want to be safe too. They don't want some.
They're almost harder on each other than we are. Like when they see somebody starting to act out, they're more likely to jump in and say, like, "Okay, settle down. Like this isn't."
Have it's interesting. So. Like when soldiers come back from Iraq and they're suffering from PTSD, and then they have these groups that they meet in and support infrastructure. Do you ever see that happening emergently, or are there programs in place to do stuff like that?
Specifically for groups of homeless people?
Yeah, just for like a support network, a peer system or does it just kind of happen from an emergent standpoint?
So I do see some of that. I mean, I think everybody on the streets there's a hierarchy and there are groups that stick together.
Yeah.
But that was actually one of the things, Iverson Center is largely peer run. And they do a lot of work around this.
Is that in Chico or no?
Yeah, it's in Chico. Okay. It's actually over right by on Rio Linda, right by the North Valley, old North Valley.
Yeah, so there's two new entities that popped up that I had no idea about, and I just can't add another 2 episodes, but
and Iverson's been doing a long time. I mean, they do job training, they do counseling, they do it's a drop-in, they do all sorts of things over there.
And then does the COC monitor them as well?
That's a good question.
Will they be on HMIS?
I don't know that I've seen their representatives at COC meetings.
Yeah, I'm just wondering who's on a HMIS and who's not. Yeah. Again, it gets back to this case management thing and this chain of custody.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. So, I mean, so anyway, long story short, I mean, at the facility in Orange Street, that was the other reason that we really, really loved it, was it had a number of kind of different rooms. It had a lot of big open spaces, which are good for being able to, understand what's going on and monitor things. But it also had a lot of rooms that could either be used for one-on-one counseling or group meetings.
Little breakout sessions, basically.
Yeah. And that was a big goal of that was, peer-to-peer, but also like drug and alcohol counseling, AA meetings, NA meetings, just basic direct case management, all of that.
So if Orange Street's dead, is it low barrier shelter dead, or has it been moved somewhere else? And I want to get back to the Walmart money because I know that, the Jesus Center got the lion's share of that. It sounds like Torres Shelter didn't get, I think it was like 80-20 or something.
Yeah, I think.
Which was actually super surprising to me. And I'm not sure how it went that way from just a pure bed capacity, right? And the ability to just, brute force move the needle on things. Joy's organization is just bigger.
Yeah.
You would think it's counterintuitive to me that it went that way instead of. But can you kind of unbox why you think it settled out that way?
There were a ton of factors. I mean, I feel like North Valley Community Foundation. I think they were struggling with this a bit and not liking the controversy. I mean,
because Walmart basically gave them the money, right? And just washed their hands of it because it's a politically, from a brand perspective, that's just like they wanted to.
I don't think that they washed their hands, and I think they were still monitoring.
Okay.
And from what I understand from Giovanni, he was in regular contact with them, letting them know what was going on, and that they had expressed concerns about concerns in the community. And I think at some point, North Valley, they've got this huge fund that they're administering for the Campfire, And I think that
it's like 40 million plus, right?
Right. And so, I mean, I think that's their primary focus, and I suspect that they did not love that controversial aspects of this either.
Yeah.
And so they shifted it. They just gave the money back to Walmart and said, Walmart can administer this. And there's a whole bunch of reasons that it could have gone to Jesus Center. We were always the small underdog on this project, so that was not terribly surprising. We hope for a different outcome, but we didn't have the established history, and we didn't have the budgets that they have, so we were more of an unknown. And Laura already has connections with Walmart. She was the one that they talked to in the first place. She already knew folks there.
Okay.
Giovanni had encouraged Mark Orm at the city, and I'm confused about how all this happened, but he had asked Mark to write a letter encouraging Walmart to direct the funds to the Renewal Center. So I imagine that carried some weight, the city manager writing that. We didn't find out about that. Joy and I didn't find out about that until after it had happened. So there was not great communication. And then I think that I suspect that Sean Morgan and Casey Reynolds, from what I understand, were kind of advocating behind the scenes for this as well. So there was just, it's a small town, and there's a lot of
It sounds like it's a
lot of back channel
multi-layered
communication.
political thing.
Right. I mean, and that does feel like what it was in the end.
Yeah.
And I don't want to go after the Jesus Center. I was talking to Laura about this yesterday, and one thing to keep in mind is that this it still benefits the community ultimately, and that's the goal.
Yeah.
And I think our goal, all of us, I think Laura, I think Joy, and I think our agency, we all are more and more clear. It's one thing that we keep returning to is HMIS and collaboration. Yeah. But I think we're all very clear at this point that collaboration benefits us all.
Absolutely.
And so I think we all wish that the outcome had been different. Well, not we all.
Yeah.
I think Joy and Safe Space wish that the outcome had been different. But I think there were a lot of factors already at work, and I'm not surprised.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Laura's recently back from Europe, I think, so hopefully we can get her on and ask her what her thoughts are on it.
Yeah.
Well, we're pushing up on hour and a half. And when we get to volunteer fatigue, there's also something called listener fatigue. So I want to, there's one thing I wanted to talk about, and then what's coming. Like, what are you guys up to in the next, year? And then forward, and then what are you most excited about? And then we'll get into social media and talk about your website, location, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So what's on the roadmap for the remainder of this year? It sounds like you're trying to get a more permanent thing, or less places to bounce around to.
Yeah. I mean, we still have some of the churches are being used by Paradise Unified. I don't think that's going to change. And so that's going to limit us. And so, yeah, I think our big goal for both just logistics of moving stuff week to week, and also the amount that we spend on transportation is such a huge portion of our budget. So I think our goal is to identify a location where initially we'll operate as we have operated. And it'll probably be just nighttime sheltering, unless we can get other funding through this supernova to expand that some.
Do you guys have anything earmarked yet?
No, we have no. We had really, and our entire team had been completely focused on Orange Street. And as I've said, everybody except for one person on our board has a full-time job. So we have all been scrambling, and focused on that project. And so,
how much runway do you guys have? Like, when do you start taking people on? Like November, late November?
End of November, first week of December.
Okay.
And one of the things we've talked about is if we can swing this, and I think we can do the fundraising that we need to do. If we can swing it, and I guess the big challenge is finding a location. But if we can swing that, then I think we'll try at least this year to maybe go November through the end of March to expand our season a little bit, because it kills us every year. We close, and then, the following week there's a downpour, and we all just cringe thinking about the people that we that
especially
we know
the weather pattern. I mean, I feel it fly fishing, so I hear you. It's probably 10 times worse, at least 100 times worse for you guys. Okay, so what are you most excited about? Is it really just, I don't know if there's anything to be excited about right now. It doesn't sound like, but until you find a spot, right?
Yeah.
I guess that's the trigger.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still, maybe it's just me, I'm still excited about our organization. I love Safe Space. And I love it because it is this community thing. And it changes people. I see people come in and they've kind of got the folded arms and the body language. They're not sure what to do, what to make of it. And you will just see them completely change. A lot of times by the end of the shift, they're chatting with people, and then they carry that sense of things out into the community. And that's, and Torres and Jesus Center have volunteers too, but not to the extent that we do. And so that will be a core part of what we do always. I mean, when we were talking about Orange Street, we're going to hire a shelter manager and cover, but we still wanted to keep a lot of slots volunteer for just that reason. We feel like that's the best way to build community, and if we don't build community,
it's part of the culture too.
Yeah, I mean, we have to build community around this issue, and around the people. Otherwise, we're stuck. So.
Makes sense.
Yep.
So, in terms of finding your guys' website, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. How can people help, basically? Where do they find you?
So you can find us at safespacechico.org. And if you search for Safe Space Chico on Facebook, you'll find us there. You can donate at either place. Facebook has an easy link there for donations, as does the website itself. I don't know that we have an Instagram yet. I don't know that we're using Twitter yet.
I wouldn't recommend Twitter. It's kind of a dying platform, unless you just want to go on there and rant. Well, thank you guys for listening. If you guys like this episode, please rate us on Google Play and iTunes. Angela, thanks very much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks
Appreciate
for having me.
Finally worked out our schedules. Got you on. Thanks for listening. We'll have a couple more, and then we'll be on to season 2. Thanks for listening.
This podcast has been brought to you by AMP.build, a software and digital design agency located in Chico, California. Learn more at www.amp.build. If you have ideas or questions for the show, send an email to hello@amp.build. We may air it on the next show.